Hey guys, this is Lenny Gleva from TCO Fly Shop here with a new video series we're going to be starting. We're going to be focusing on a variety of different hatches that we see here in the eastern United States through the Mid-Atlantic region, and kind of talking you through what flies you should be fishing, and then get into a little bit of tying and talk about the whole hatch kind of as a whole. So to start, kind of season appropriate right now, we're going to be dealing with blueing olives, little blueing olives, beta nymphs. The interesting thing about this particular group of bugs is that there are a lot of different species of bugs that we commonly refer to as blueing olives. Without getting into the crazy kind of Latin-esque terms, we're just going to talk about what we as anglers look for and see on the water. So olives on average are going to start hatching in most of our streams, I'd say by mid-February into mid-March, depending upon where you're at, weather, water conditions, so on and so forth. And they're a really, really important food source for a lot of our local trout here. They're one of the first major consistent hatches that the fish see after a winter of eating nymphs and obviously midging here and there. But it provides us with the first opportunities for some really fun, consistent dry fly fishing, and some opportunities where those fish are really getting hungry and getting happy and eating nymphs and dries across the board very well. So to start, we're going to go through a couple different flies. We're going to kind of work our way from the bottom up through the top of the water column here. So in the vise right now, I have a little nymph here. This is a cinnamon toast beta nymph, originally tied by Kevin Compton. It's a really, really effective nymph pattern for me. It's been a consistent producer for me and quite a few of my friends over the last few years, and we're actually going to get into tying that in a later video. Coupled with that, the things to think about: what makes a good beta nymph, what makes a good olive nymph. Obviously, a good old-fashioned pheasant tail is going to work for most situations. It's a dark, kind of basic shape that looks like a lot of different mayflies. But things that make a good beta nymph, specifically in my opinion, are going to be a little bit maybe a darker thorax, maybe a really thin, slim abdomen. And you can achieve this a couple different ways. I'm a big fan of thread-bodied nymphs. Things you're going to see would be like Egan's Thread Frenchie or Egan's Iron Lotus. Again, the cinnamon toast here from Kevin Compton, a variety of patterns of that style where you're going to get that really, really thin, slender profile is something I'm really looking for at this time of the year. The other thing, too, to think about is on average in the springtime, our water flows are a little bit higher. That's going to depend year to year and vary a bit, but having those slender little bodies, specifically in the kind of Egan's world of flies, most of Lance's stuff, you'll notice they're coated flies, whether you're coating them with lacquer or varnish or UV resin, a variety of different materials, but things that are going to drop very, very quickly through the water column. A lot of the Perdigon style nymphs are very, very effective and popular for this as well. So as you move on through the nymphs, obviously this particular pattern happens to be on a jig hook with a tungsten bead, and you can tie them in a variety of different weights and sizes. But I'm usually going to start with something that's 16 or 18 range for most of our spring little bluing olive hatches, that Betas family. As we continue to go up through the water column, obviously you can get into your same style and same exact patterns, but maybe tied with a brass bead. Transitioning from there, then we'd start looking at things still below the surface, but up in that top maybe 6 or 8 inches. A really, really awesome pattern in that realm would be like a bar emerger, specifically a beadhead bar emerger. So John Barr, obviously a very prolific fly tyer and designer, has come up with tons and tons of good patterns that have helped anglers all over the world catch more fish. But the bar emerger is one of his more basic patterns, but in my opinion, often an underrated pattern. With fishing it with a bead, you can get it comfortably a few inches below the surface, whether you're fishing that in a dry dropper rig or with a traditional indicator rig. You can also fish it on a tag in a tight line European nymphing style rig as well. But that's a really, really effective fly where you're going to start seeing those fish are really going to start keying up on that kind of upper portion of the water column. So the bar emerger, again, is a really, really important one for me. And a lot of flies in that similar kind of vein. Another very similar pattern that I fish a lot of would be like a Craven's Juju Betas. So it's a little bit more complicated to tie at the vise. We obviously have plenty of them here at the shop for you. But that, again, is a really thin, slender profiled mayfly nymph that just I've done extremely well with. Even in surprisingly high flows, those fish will still pick out those size 18s and even 20s pretty readily. So that's a great, great pattern there. Now moving higher in the water column even still, now we're going to get just below the surface. So like I said, a non-beadhead version of a bar emerger. Even like a greased pheasant tail is a really good option as you start getting right into the film, the meniscus of the water there. I also fish a lot of emerger patterns in this kind of area of the water. So like a Burke emerger, CDC curve shank Burke emerger is a great option there. You'll also have things like pop emergers, where you have a forward-facing wing, and maybe the body is going to sit down in the water film, the film of the surface of the water there. That's a really awesome pattern as well, for when you have those fish that are clearly keen up on flies on the surface of the water, but not necessarily maybe fully breaching and eating on the surface all the time. From there, then you would transition into kind of the sparkle dun realm. Now, whether you do that with a CDC sparkle dun or a traditional deer hair sparkle dun, obviously Craig Matthews really knew what he was doing when he came up with that style fly, and it's a great little tweak on the kind of the Cucci and Nastasi thinking of the traditional comparator dun. I like trailing shucks, whether that's on a traditional dry fly or, like I said, some of those emergery kind of flies where you're fishing them right in the film there. For me, they're a little bit faster to tie. They're easy. They float quite well, and I've definitely had days where maybe it's just in my head, but I think that's really made the difference for me as far as catching more fish. Then you start getting into, again, your traditional kind of classic straight-up dry flies. Parachute-style flies are fantastic, specifically if you're fishing dry dropper. You can put a lot of hackle on a big parachute, whether that's done with a traditional calf body hair post or a CDC post or a high-vis polypro yarn post. You can do a lot there to suspend a lot of weight, and I love to dry dropper fish during blueing olive hatches because it allows you to cover multiple depths of the water column. And then lastly, you're going to get into, like I said, your Barr's Visit Dun, again going back to John Barr, or say like a traditional even Catskill style dry fly. I personally don't fish a lot of Catskill style stuff because most of the time the water I'm fishing, fish are a little bit more heavily pressured, and I think something that's going to float a little bit lower in the surface film is going to do a little bit better job of maybe fooling a few more fish for me. But that's kind of a really good basic rundown of what I'm looking for as far as blueing olive patterns. I'm going to start at the bottom of the column, and I'm going to work my way up. As the hatch progresses, that's a great way to do it as well. Earlier in the morning, when you've been having consistent blueing olive hatches, let's say it's early March, water's still fairly cold, air temperatures are still fairly cold, you might get to the stream at 8 a.m. and you're not going to see a whole lot of rising activity, but maybe you start seeing some shucks or a couple random olives here and there. Starting with a nymph and working your way up through the water column is a great way to kind of plan out your day. Those fish might not be actively rising, but they're very much so actively feeding on those beta nymphs. As they continue to move further and further up in the water column, the fish are obviously going to follow those bugs, and therefore you're going to be able to fish higher and higher and higher until eventually you might get some true, honest dry fly fishing in. So as I've kind of talked through this, there's a lot to think about for sure, and the same thing applies to every individual hatch. Bug behavior is really going to impact what the fish are doing. Are we dealing with swimming nymphs like Baetis, or are we dealing with say crawlers like a stonefly maybe that's going to actually move and crawl to shallow riffles and actually crawl up out of the water? So for a lot of people that can be a little bit overwhelming at first, and there's a lot of different really good resources out there, but one of my favorites is a book here by Mr. Paul Weimer. So this book called The Bug Book is absolutely fantastic. It's a great kind of transition from someone who maybe has a little bit of information but not totally sure about what type of fly imitates what stage, or maybe you don't know anything and you're just new and getting into fly fishing. That style book is really fantastic because it doesn't overwhelm you with just Latin genus and species over and over and over again. But he's done a fantastic job of taking the very technical entomology side of things and transition that into useful applications as far as fishing. I've worked for Paul in the past. He's a fantastic author, a fantastic fisherman, and a great fly tyer. And a book like that is really, in my opinion, a worthwhile investment, specifically when you're talking about any kind of hatch, where it's going to show you, maybe at this point in time, I'm going to want to use a parachute-style dry fly, or for this bug, I'm going to want to use more of a comparadun-style dry fly, and he does a great job of breaking that down through the book. So that's about it for today. Hopefully you've learned some stuff as far as just, again, our basic kind of rigging for blueing olives. what flies you're going to be looking for. Again, starting low in the water column earlier in the day and then working your way progressively higher and higher and higher as those fish continue to follow the bugs and they actively start feeding on the surface. After this, we're going to get into some fly time videos. We're going to break down a couple of the patterns I talked about, and hopefully we're going to continue to do this with a variety of other hatches. We're going to get into, obviously, caddis, Hendricksons, March Browns, sulfurs, etc., etc. So thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, for sure, feel free to reach out, give us a call at the shop, shoot us an email, and check out our online store. Again, make sure you find the Bug Book by Mr. Paul Weimer. Fantastic investment, a lot of information, a lot to learn. Thank you.